Paranormal Dimensions is a regular feature on Mondays on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Greetings from the third dimension. You're listening to the Paranormal UK Radio Network, the biggest UK paranormal network. I'm David Young, and this is Paranormal Dimensions. Hello, welcome, and thank you for tuning in. I've got a lovely guest for you today. It's Adele Casales Rocha. She's got a new book out, and it's called Portals, and it's going to be fascinating because, I haven't been able to get this book yet, and I shall explain to Adele myself in a minute, but it looks a fascinating book, and I can't actually wait to get a hold of it. So what I'll do, I'll waste no more time, I'll introduce you to Adele. Hello, Adele.
Hello.
Hello.
Good morning or good afternoon, I should say, David.
Yeah, it's good morning to you and good afternoon here. It's actually the sun's shining a bit now. It was really pouring with rain a little while ago, but it's actually quite nice now. So I hope it is nice where you are.
Well, actually, it was raining a few minutes ago, and now it's tapered off a little bit. So this is a perfect setting for what we're about to talk about.
Absolutely, and I'm actually intrigued. I can't wait to talk about it. It actually sounds a fascinating book. I don't know. Shall I just let you start the show, or do you want me to ask you questions?
Okay, well, this is actually my first book, and as you mentioned, it's entitled Portal. It's a lifetime of paranormal experiences, and I need to qualify first off that when I say paranormal, I actually mean the entire panoply of things that people have witnessed or experienced that are out of the ordinary. So,
indeed, yeah.
Yeah, and this book talks about anything from, in the opening pages, you will see something that is similar to a Mothman creature, although a lot of people have indicated that it was a demon. The people who actually have experienced it directly think that it is a malevolent entity and basically a demon. It was experienced through generations of a family in particular that I've gotten to know very well. And so it goes from that to witnessing elves, to humanoids, to cryptids, all the way to the end of the book where there was a shadow being that was witnessed by an elderly woman who lives alone. So we even have an incident, an eyewitness report of a Bigfoot from a middle-aged lady. And if you notice, a lot of the things when you do read this book are events that happen because people are either alone or in a remote area. In some cases, it's in the middle of a village or a large town. So the book offers you everything, whatever you're interested in. If it is bizarre, it is unusual. It is also very terrifying. Some of the sightings are, pretty benign. It could just be a light, but I don't have too many of that. But most of them are terrifying.
Yeah. Oh, well. I know the Bigfoot signs are often... I find those very interesting. Actually, you don't really know what to believe with a lot of it, because you don't know if it's like interdimensional things, or some people connect it to UFOs, and I really don't know. But there must be something in it. That's all I can say.
Yeah, and I have to tell you, David, that it's interesting that you bring that up, because there are a few theories surrounding Bigfoot. I know they have a conference right now, which sadly I cannot attend. It is about 4 hours away from here, still here in Pennsylvania, but on the other end of Pennsylvania towards Pittsburgh, where they're having major, it's a campground that they're using, and they're in the midst of a forest. Talking about Bigfoot and bringing in guest speakers. But there's two camps on Bigfoot. There's people who believe that Bigfoot is a multi-dimensional being. Some of the reports, as you know, link it to a UFO sighting. either before or after, or maybe even during the sighting of the Bigfoot. It's incredibly elusive, so that you only have a few photos, and they're hard to verify. I think the name escapes me, but it's a two-name sighting. Two gentlemen. Now I'm having the aneurysm like you did a few minutes ago. I can't remember their name. Yes. It was two gentlemen that actually took a wonderful photograph of something that was walking away, and if you look at it, it looks like a gorilla. You know, and it looks flesh and blood to me, to you and I. Some people, however, believe that it's multidimensional because it just simply disappears. It's 1 minute it's there, the next minute it's not. Some people believe it's the missing link, and that it is somehow malevolent, and that there were cases where people were hurt. So I do have one case in the book, and if you'd like me to tell you briefly,
absolutely, yeah,
about that one, it's a rather riveting story, and it came across my way because I had a friend who lived in central Pennsylvania, which is where this woman is located. So she had given me her number, and the woman was very reluctant to share what is actually happening to her, and refrained from actually reporting it to the people who do the Bigfoot investigations. So I talked to her on the phone. She described to me exactly what happened, and apparently this is what happened. So just to give you a little bit of background of where she is, the house is a simple, what you would call a rancher. That's a one floor. So there's only one ground floor to the home. She lives alone, and in a lot of cases, the people are pretty much alone. She was simply going about a normal day, and across from her house, about maybe 50 feet, is a road. And then the neighbor across the street is an old farm. It was a farmer and his wife. They're elderly. They were probably, I would say, in their late 70s to 80s. And the farm has livestock, and it has horses. And at the time when this encounter happened, actually they only had horses, from my understanding from her. Beyond the stables, which is several yards from the actual farmhouse where the elderly couple lives, is a state game lands area. And when I tell you that, just for the benefit of the audience, it means that there's hunters there during hunting season. They could be hunting deer. They could be hunting all kinds of different game.
Yeah.
One side of it is just basically a forest that's undeveloped. One side is a game lands. And then behind the woman that we're talking about is even more forest. So they're pretty isolated. It's central PA tends to have, or Pennsylvania, I should say, tends to have a lot of undeveloped land when you go into the central portion. And a lot of events happen there, not just Bigfoot, but other types of sightings. In this case, she apparently wanted to go out and shop. She went and shopped, and then later on in the day, she had a coconut husk. Okay, and she wanted to open the coconut husk. So people who live alone in that area tend to have, they're either equipped with guns or they have hatchets or axes. And in this case, she had an axe. So she came out to the backyard, which is only a few meters away from her side of the forest, and proceeded to hack away at this coconut husk. So as she was going on, in the periphery of her sight, to her right, across the street, she saw something running, and it was bipedal. It was running on 2 feet. And it was coming from the direction of the stables and into the forest. So the first thing that came to her mind is that it was a bear. and I guess you and I would think the same
Hmm.
thing, not really knowing of anything that large.
Had she ever given any thought to that before, or was this kind of just thrust upon her sort of thing?
No, she'd never come across one. She actually didn't even know
Or hadn't
what
even
they
thought of
are.
it? Yeah, I understand.
No, she's not the type. She works for a supermarket. She basically is a housewife with two grown children, and they both had moved away, and the husband was, I think they were either divorced or deceased.
Because that's
But
usually
she
the way
was,
things happen, isn't it? That something
yeah,
just gets thrust upon you as a surprise, and
yeah, yeah,
and that
know,
makes you a believer.
what is it?
Yeah.
So she was a little shaken, but what happened was she did not know what it was. She left what she had out there. She dashed into the house because she did not want the creature to come back, and locked the door. She had a back door, so she secured the door. And then later on came out again and finally got the coconut. She proceeded to do her chore. She made some kind of a pudding that she liked, and so on and so forth, and figured she would set apart a part of it for the elderly couple across the street, because basically it's just the three of them for miles and miles. So what then happened is that evening she was popping popcorn. She had no idea, what was going on, but she heard tapping. The popcorn was tapping against the microwave. And as the popcorn was popping, she was going on watching the television. And then suddenly the popping stopped, but there was a rapping against the wall of her house by the kitchen. So now you're in the countryside, you're alone, okay? Most of the time people know each other because it's really just a very small population. Like in a village, you would know each other. So she wondered who it was that was rapping on her back door. Most people knock on the front door. So she walked over, she listened in, and she was looking and looking through the curtain of the back door. And, she couldn't see anything. Okay? So she came out finally, just out of curiosity. She opens the door, and she had no lights back there. So, David, you're in the countryside, you're in the middle of nowhere, basically. Only your front door has a light. Your back has nothing, so it's pitch dark.
It's a bit like where I live here.
Yeah. So the only thing you have is the light from your kitchen, which is now shining on the grass. This was sometime, I think, in the summertime. And, with the axe, a few meters away from you. And she senses a presence standing by the side of the house, which is only a few feet from where she's standing. So, of course, now she's terrified. She slams the door, completely locks it, which is what you and I do. Sometimes in the movies, they'll have them coming out. Like, what? Why are you coming out?
Yeah.
There's somebody standing there, and they're not friendly. They're not saying, hello, how are you? She dashes back in. So as the story goes, the next morning, she's all totally creeped out. She decides in the light of day to cross over across the street and knock on the front door and offer them part of the pudding that she had made. And she then proceeds to tell the farmer, who walks over to her house, that somebody had been knocking on her back door. She had no idea who it was, but she didn't go out to investigate. And the gentleman was looking around, and they had a discussion about what she had seen right by his stables. And he said to her, did you happen to see how it moved? And she said, yes, it was running back to the woods. It was a huge bear. And he said, bears don't run, my dear. They amble back to the woods and on all fours. They don't run. Well, this one was running on 2 feet. So this is what she had witnessed. And that's when he told her, in fact, what he apparently had seen before, having lived there much longer than she has. that it was a Bigfoot.
That's
So
right, because
she,
when a bear runs, it does go down on its 4 feet, doesn't it, and start running along like a four-legged animal. Yeah.
Mhm. So it was very jarring for her, and I mean ultimately, from what I understand, eventually she moved into town.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
Yeah.
I say I
So
know how
that's
dark it can be because, as I say, where I live here in the UK, it's actually we haven't got any neighbours and it's empty at the front and empty at the back. And at night it's really dark, so I'm expecting something like that one night.
and I think it's because there's miles and miles of I forget who mentioned this to me, because the U.S. is so
Oh, it's vast. Yeah,
huge,
I know.
it's vast.
Yeah.
So you're going to have some land that probably no one has ever entered. You've got national parks, and I mentioned this on the Friday night show. There were national parks where people were spontaneously disappearing, and
Well,
small toddlers.
there's a vast amount of people go missing, isn't there, in the national parks? I
Yeah,
think it's
yeah.
somewhere around about, I don't know, it's certainly in the team, somewhere around about 14,000 people went missing.
Probably about that. There is a
Which is an
gentleman.
amazing amount of people. Yeah, where do they all
It
go? It's
is.
crazy,
It,
you know.
it is, and it. A lot of people will explain it away as, oh, maybe they fell, they hurt themselves, or ended up, falling to their death on a canyon, yada yada
Well,
yada.
there's probably some of those. Yeah, you've
Yeah,
got, yeah, that's going to
but
happen. But yeah.
there's a gentleman by the name of David Paulides, and he has written, I think, about 6 or 7 volumes at this point, accounting all the different disappearances in forests. And well, I'll tell you, some of the cases there, and it's not included in my book because you will never find me in a national park. If you do, and I have camped. I usually have about maybe 100 people with me. And my tent is usually right smack in the middle of all these hundreds of people. So I'm not likely to disappear unless, of course, something, beams me
Yeah.
up from the top of the tent and whisks me away.
Yeah, you've scared me now because I've been alone myself in some of those national parks in the States, miles away from anyone.
Oh, have you?
Yeah, I have quite a few.
Oh.
Yeah, quite a few of them.
Oh, my heavens. Oh, my. So, but I tell you, a lot of the cases in the book are not documented because people are reluctant to actually report it into a documenting agency. And, there's a lot of events that came from, and that's how my book opens, are the atrocities that happened in World War II. In an Asian country where I was actually born and raised in the Philippines. So if I may segue into that, being that you're into hauntings,
Sure, yeah.
I think this is definitely up your alley.
Yeah. Well, this show covers anything to do with the paranormal. We don't sort of concentrate on just one subject, which I think makes it all the more fascinating to cover different subjects. So yeah, please do.
Okay, so David, you had mentioned yesterday that you had finally given up on investigating a Scottish castle, and I tell you that was a beautiful castle that you showed on Facebook.
Yeah, I put about probably about 100 pictures, I think, up from. I was going to try and do a show from it. I was trying to explain on my page, and if people want to visit my page, they'll see the pictures. And I was going to try and do a show, but the sound quality wasn't good. I got about 45 minutes of reasonable sound, so I thought I'll just gave it up and thought, well, I'll just put the pictures up and explain why.
And it was very obvious to me that it was also a very old, ancient residence.
Yeah.
What happens in older countries, and I will preface that by saying, Europe, Asia, the U.S. is relatively young at 200 years plus. The U.S. has never really witnessed wide-scale war as much as Europe has, and as much as certain areas.
Well, I suppose
of
the biggest
Asia.
one would have been the Revolutionary War, and then the coming Civil War, wouldn't it have been? But, obviously that.
Hopefully not.
No. Sorry, I didn't mean the coming Civil War. I meant the previous Civil War.
Oh, okay.
after the Revolutionary War.
But David, I think that's a slip because
Yeah.
we might have a civil war because of our current president here. But I won't talk politics.
No, we don't want to go into that. But I do understand exactly. I mean, it's getting close to it here as well, I think, with Brexit. But
So, so anyway, going back to the history of the Philippines, let me just preface that for the benefit of the audience, so they have an understanding that this is an Asian country that is very much in the center of the Pacific Rim. And what I mean by that is it is strategically right near China, near Taiwan, above Indonesia. So it's a crossroads country, and for that reason, when colonization took place, which you well know has happened, with people coming out of Europe and hitting all parts of the globe, the Spanish latched on to the Philippines for 400 years. So during that time, of course, there were battles, there were wars, not as horrible as World War II. And then at the close of that, the European influence lingered. So for generations and generations, you have last names, which is pretty much like the last name that I have in my real name, and the last name that I had picked for my book. You've got last names that are Spanish. You also have commerce coming from Europe back and forth, even from the UK, actually. I still miss those chocolates that come through.
I'll see what I can do about that.
Yeah, and the biscuits. But so anyway, not to bore you, we had products from Italy, yada, yada, yada. So in comes World War II. And on our end of the world, it was an invasion by the Japanese. Nothing against the current Japanese. They had nothing to do with it. But World War II was a major atrocity for a small Pacific island that was very trusting of outside influence. At the end of that, there were just a lot of people who were obviously massacred, murdered, butchered, and even the Japanese themselves, of course. Some of the soldiers never made it home. So we have mass graves is what we're dealing with, and that's out of those mass graves that are unblessed come the type of hauntings that we have witnessed through the years and even now. So now we're going to go into a little isolated area. When I say isolated, we're talking back in the 60s of something that a house that was built on unblessed ground. The people who bought the house, and I know the family extensively, did not know that it was an unofficial burial ground for the Japanese. So there were actually bodies there that are probably in there to this day. So on top of that, they built a brand new home. It was a neighborhood that was springing up literally from the ground. So a gentleman and his wife built a 4-bedroom home on top of that. Actually 5 if you count the laboratory in the back. The gentleman was a doctor. He was in a MASH unit assisting U.S. forces during the war against the Japanese. His wife was a dentist who also assisted in some manner because everybody was hands on deck. It was a small country and the war was just incredible. So at the end of that Liberation Day, they reunited because for a while she ended up going up into the hinterlands north. And if you look at a map of Luzon, this is very, very north going towards an area called Baguio. So the story begins that she had 4 children at the time. As they were fleeing the Japanese and hiding, they came upon an empty convent that apparently had already been infiltrated by the Japanese. The nuns that were there were murdered in cold blood. Who knows what else happened to them. But she was seeking shelter. Okay, this is before the house was built. I'm jumping back and forth now because I'm so random. Hope I'm not confusing.
No, I'm with you.
But at the time, she only had 4 out of the 6 children with her. The oldest one was, I think, around 10. The second one was around 8 or 7. And the youngest one was, I think, at the time, only 2 years old. So she sought shelter. She had been walking, hitching rides, trying to find a way to escape. And meanwhile, her husband was somewhere in action because he was a soldier and a medical doctor. He was a medic. She enters the convent, and the children are looking at the detritus of war. You've got things scattered all over the place. You've got the kitchen turned over, the furniture turned over, and all they were trying to do was seek shelter. The second to the oldest, who tends to be very headstrong, had apparently strolled off and wandered off and gone up to the first floor and found beds up there. So instead of staying with her mother and the other children who sequestered themselves somewhere in an area where they could all be together, she ran alone to the top floor and proceeded to lie down because she had found some beds. I mean, these are like sleeping quarters of the cloister. Okay, so if you're following me, this is open, huge open windows, open to the night. Night has already descended. When you're in a tropical country and night descends and you have no screens on your windows, what you were assailed with, and everything from bats to mosquitoes to flies to any kind of an insect. So apparently this child laid down and she was near a window. And sometime in the middle of the night, the child woke up. The child woke up, sat up, and thought she saw something approaching her in the dark. Now, this is a room that collectively is for nuns. So there's probably about 10 beds in the room, all lined up with windows on one side and a door or two. The nun was coming from a door down and working her way towards this girl. Everything around her was completely dark, except for whatever light was coming in from the open windows. So, picture the ceilings as being high, the windows totally open to the night, and some light shining through. And here's a nun in black habit with the face completely obscured. And she's got this white band over her head, where the cowl ends, and there is nothing there. So the child is riveted to the bed and somehow is unable to move, like she was going through a night terror. Meanwhile, the nun is approaching, and the next thing she knows is that it leaned over, and then she saw it had an angry face with red eyes, David. It leaned over to her, and with a fist, it hit her on the thigh. And then it moved off, and the child started screaming. Her throat was locked.
That's terrifying, yeah.
Scream. And it is going off, and the thing, whatever it was, the specter was floating. It had no feet. She's screaming, and then finally she manages to bolt off the bed. Her mother is looking for her. She can hear her now, and she finally gets to her as the girl was trying to leave the room. And David, I am not kidding you. Are you ready for this?
I am, I think.
She then examines the child, this is the mother, to find that there was a mark of the ring on the child's thigh.
Wow, yeah.
It had some kind of symbol. Now remember, this is a nun, I would imagine a Catholic nun, because most of the Philippines is 99% Catholic because of the Spanish. So when they look at it, most of rings usually have either a photo of maybe a cross or some kind of a saint. This one had something unique from what I understand. I've never seen it. Okay, we've never gotten a hold of a photograph of what was on the child's thigh. But that mark did not disappear until years later after her husband committed suicide.
Ooh. It sent a bit of a tingle up my spine, that did.
So, it to this family, whatever it was, apparently that nun probably, died.
Yeah.
Okay, was murdered. Another unquiet soul.
Indeed. That actually sounds quite terrifying for a child, for that sort of experience, Yeah.
Yes, and the child was traumatized, obviously. So it went on from there. That was the first thing that had happened to the family that was interesting and unusual, so to say the least.
So they obviously looked into the history of the area, did they, where they were living?
I don't think they did, because this is what happened, David. The next morning, because as you know, they're in the midst of a war, she wanted to move on before someone saw them again. So they were in hiding for a while until finally whatever was happening was slowly, and I don't know how wars go. I know this one went from, like, I believe 1939 and didn't end until 1945, just like all the other wars that happened. So it gets calmer, then it goes, go crazy again. They finally reunited with the father, okay? And now we get to Liberation Day. And everyone in the family has survived, except for the mother of the child. A younger brother had been shot by the Japanese. So now they move into a suburban area, totally brand new. And, after war has happened, the aftermath is they clean up whatever they can clean up, they rebuild. You see that in Syria right now in certain parts. They build new buildings, they build homes, and then they go on as best they can with their lives. And that's when the next thing happens with this family. And the woman, who is now in her early 20s, okay, she has gone through college, university, she marries. The gentleman she marries, for some reason, okay, is being oppressed by something that he claims he sees through the window. It has gotten so bad that when they decide to move on their own into this townhouse, and this is only about maybe 3 miles away from her mother's house, that he now sees this creature through his window almost on a nightly basis. Would you like to know what he's saying?
Oh yes, absolutely. I thought you were just going to carry on to tell us, but yeah.
Okay, so here we are. This is once again a little neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's what you would call a hamlet, because it's really, there's not many shops there during the time. This is in the 60s. It's probably busy and crazy right now, but during the 60s, it's pretty much a hamlet. It's a new neighborhood. You can walk from the woman's mother's house to this place. And the society at the time, people were used to having full-time servants in their home. So you didn't have to be, John Paul Getty or, Microsoft in order to have live-in servants at the time. Life was pretty easy after the war, which is really a surprise considering, what we all go through and, what happened in Europe. Life was calmer. It was easier. So the woman hired a live-in maid to help with her daily chores. The young man she married, who was also in his early 20s, wanted to write for a living. So he stayed home and pretty much had his own office. It was a 3-bedroom townhouse. When I say townhouse, it's up and down, 2 floors. You've got the ground floor, and then you have the first floor. On the first floor, you've got 3 bedrooms. There's a bathroom across in the hallway. You've got your stairs, and then you go down the stairs. Underneath the stairs, the live-in servant lived. She had a room of her own. And then there was a kitchen and then a living room. Across from the apartment, in the back, okay, of the townhouse, there is a creek. And then there are trees, huge trees that kind of hover over the creek. One of those trees was only a few yards away from the window of this young man, his name is Ernest, where he writes. His den, with his typewriter set up and everything, overlooks the creek with this tree. For a number of months, leading up to what finally happened to him, and I'll keep you in suspense since you haven't read the book. He claims to see a creature, and this creature is towering. It comes and effervesces out from this ancient tree and approaches the window. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with jalousies.
Sorry, what? Jalousies? No.
Yeah. They're made out of some type of iron.
Right.
So windows back then, they did not have screens. They just had jalousies to kind of, prevent you, I guess, from falling through.
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah,
they're huge. Yeah.
I just didn't know what they were called. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, they had 3 windows, which pretty much went the entire perimeter of one side of the house that faces the creek, which is beautiful. But it's not meant because it's, ornamental. The windows are there to afford some kind of ventilation. And on the opposite end of the house, you've got the same identical setup, so that because there was no air conditioning per se being used, is most parts of Europe don't have air conditioning. The wind is just expecting to go back and forth. So he, by the end of the day, this gentleman would start to see something coming out of the tree and approach the window, and it was accompanied by a humming sound. Okay, so you tell me what the humming sound is. I think some encounters or sightings, you get that as well. But then there's also a sense of time stopping completely.
Which is another common thing you hear, yeah.
Yeah. So he tells his wife, the young woman that you had met as a child with the ring on her, her thigh, she does not believe him because she has not seen it. Which was not a good thing. So the servant, on the other hand, who is busy assisting with the chores, is also in charge because now they have an infant next door. She's in charge of the infant. Every time the infant cries, she dashes to check on the infant. So the nursery is right next door to the den, Ernest's den. And then after the nursery is the master bedroom. So one evening, the child starts crying, and the servant dashes up the stairs. This time, as she enters the nursery, which is one bedroom away, they share a wall, the den. The window connecting to that, the creature is actually leaning against the outside of the window, looking down at the infant. So for the first time, this man who is now completely depressed and oppressed, in progress of what might have been a possession, finally the servant sees it for herself. She grabs the child out of the crib. I think the child at this point is probably 1.5 years old. She takes the child away, dashes down, and tells the woman of the house what she has seen. She is now at her limit because there were things that were happening in the house before that, knocking and things and strange movements. And now she knows why she feels like she's seeing things at the edge of her vision as soon as night falls in that particular place. So unconvinced, the woman dashes up, and asks Ernest, did you see something? Is there something going on? He said, yes, the same thing that I had been telling you about. But as it goes, finally one day she sees it for herself. Would you like to know what she saw?
Of course. Of course.
Okay. It was about 7 to 9 feet tall, is what I was told.
Yeah.
Whatever it was stretched through the entire window. The window of the den, from what I'm told, went all the way to the ceiling and was 6 feet wide. It surpassed with its wingspan the breadth of the window. It had the wings of a bat. And on its head was the suggestion of horns. It had the eyes of a cow. And it was completely yellow, the eyes, and the face of a goat. And it was staring down at the woman.
Wow. That's left me a bit speechless. It's actually quite scary. I mean, I really don't know how to express myself there for that. I mean, it sounds awful.
So you tell me, David, is this an alien creature?
Well,
is this Mothman or is it a demon?
Well, yeah, I mean, if we could explain what the Mothman is, then we'd have our answer. But obviously, it could be something interdimensional, as we've been talking. It could be an alien. Who knows? I mean, it's certainly a similar description as what I've heard before with be it the Mothman or anything else of that type of creature. I mean, what's your opinion of it?
Well, my opinion differs from the opinion of the two primary witnesses. Their opinion is that it was demonic, and I'll tell you why they feel that way. The woman, who was the child in the earlier story, ran to the other room and grabbed a cross from the wall and proceeded, because she did finally catch it. Her husband was sitting down and looking down, and she could feel the malevolence in the room. All the crickets, now the windows are open, all the crickets had gotten silent. There were no frogs. There were no, there were no nighttime noises that you normally would hear if your windows were open and it's a tropical place. Okay, you normally would hear all kinds of things. You would even hear maybe the rushing of water or neighbors talking and things of that nature, because all the windows were open. There was nothing. It was totally dead silent. She took the cross, came back to the room. The creature was pointedly looking down at her husband with such malevolence. It was almost like it wanted to devour him. And that is what he did say. He said that it wanted to take his soul. She came up with the cross, and courageous as she is, she went towards the window and put the cross inches from its face. And David, it folded in response to the cross. The wings folded as if it was covering its face. It was covering its face, and then it started to effervesce slowly down towards the ground floor, and then it just disappeared.
Right. So, I mean, I was looking at it from a religious context. You'd think that would be the immediate response, that it would be something demonic. But you think it's something else?
I don't know what to think, David, because I don't know what brought it about. The only theory I have is that perhaps because he was the type of person, Ernest, where he was very introspective, but he also was depressed. But no one knows whether he was depressed because of the creature or he was depressed beforehand. But whatever it was living in the tree. So I'm thinking it was actually a portent, like Mothman. My interpretation is that it's Mothman. That it actually was trying to forewarn the family what was going to happen.
Yeah, it's a possibility. I mean, there are people that I believe that people can actually manufacture things with their minds as well. You think of an alien and an alien will appear, sort of thing. So, could it be something like that? I don't know.
Well, David, that's interesting that you threw that little kernel in there. Because the other alternative theory was that it was manufactured mentally by him. And it's interesting because when that theory was offered to me a while back, in my salad days, I actually used to write screenplays.
Right.
And the very first one that I wrote was about this. And the theory that I had at the time, which I had latched onto after, investigating it a little bit more, was that maybe it was manufactured by him.
Yeah,
but it's pretty powerful.
I only threw that in there because I think I know it can happen in certain cases, or I've heard of anyway. Like you go out and expect to see a UFO and you'll see one. Well, obviously it doesn't always have to go like that, but I think in certain instances, I think people have got some sort of a mental power and they can actually manufacture these things, for want of a better word than manufacture, But it's very interesting that though.
Yeah, and I tell you, when I heard this account, I wondered how many people had seen it. The one person who we're talking about is still alive today and will insist and tell you it was a demon because of her encounter and the way it reacted to her when she approached with a cross. Now, the maid quit. The very next day, she could not, and then they hired a younger girl, and they instructed her not to leave the husband alone. But the other servant who had quit had actually, word of mouth, had told people about what she had seen, and this young girl found out about it. So she became apprehensive. Needless to say, she needed the income. She needed to be employed. On the other hand, she really dreaded being alone in that place.
Well, it doesn't surprise me.
No, not at all. And it goes on because what happened was, not to give the spoiler away, they move, okay, and they move back to her parents' home. And whatever it was follows them. And my understanding is that there were other things already in this house. Okay, we have elves in the house. We have ghosts because of the unblessed soil on which the house was built. So we have all kinds of things being layered on top of what is already happening at that house. And that's all in my book.
That sounds fascinating. So there's all these different creatures from different dimensions, it sounds like to me. That's because I'm actually quite into the dimension. Well, my beliefs are that much of these occurrences are from different dimensions, and I think we've got so many dimensions that can interact with each other or sometimes become visible to each other. But,
exactly, and I believe that too, David. I really believe that we are limited to 5 senses, but there's all kinds of things, and someone had talked about that. I think it was Chris Evers in a previous show, that they're whispering to us that they exist. They enter our dimension when they want to be known, or maybe perhaps just because they want to intrude upon us for benevolent or malevolent reasons. And I think, the ETs are the same. They come from different dimensions. Yeah. Some don't have bodies, and some do. You've seen them crash. But I think that definitely is what the real reality is, so to speak, is that there's a lot of things that are out there that are totally strange to us and terrifying to us because we don't understand them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, once upon a time, I couldn't see any connections between ghosts and UFOs and other creatures and things, but I can. Over the last few years, I've actually come to sort of realise that I think there's a lot of truth in that. Where you think you might be seeing an alien, you're maybe seeing a ghost, or you could be seeing a ghost, but you're actually seeing an alien. You know, it's
Yes.
you know, I really do think that is what we're beginning to understand now. And I think your book will probably go a long way into helping with that as well, from what I understand of it so far.
Yeah, and it's very difficult. I mean, some people are telling me, well, you've got a little bit of everything here. And usually when someone writes a book, there's a certain trend with it, or, you know, I'll use the term loosely, branding. You know, you're being branded as someone who is perhaps a Bigfoot investigator or a UFO investigator, or maybe you're like Dr. Lear, the doctor who takes away the implants. But you don't usually have someone who is, you know, sharing all different kinds of encounters and sightings. But this is all a collection of things that I have collected through the years.
Because you were connected with MUFON, were you not? Or are you still?
Yes, I was. I was actually connected with MUFON. I was with them for a year and a half. I would have to say it was a very productive year and a half. It ended with me putting together a conference here in Bucks County where I live. But I was also able to meet quite a number of people who did not want to report what they had seen and what they have experienced. And the most significant ones I put in the book. You know, MUFON is a large organization, and a lot of people who come forward and put their report in there are the courageous ones, I think, because, you know, it's followed up. They ask them for photographs, they ask them for video and things of that nature. So I did that part of that and noticed that when I met with them one-to-one, sometimes they will follow through, but sadly, half the time they will not. They're afraid that somehow their employer will find out. Friends who might not be as open as they are will find out. They don't want the ridicule. You know, they don't want someone saying, "Oh my goodness, maybe you need to visit a doctor or something."
Yeah, that's the usual answer, isn't it?
Yeah. So the time I was with MUFON, I was also on the STAR team, and they put me on dispatch, which basically entails being at a computer and looking for reports that are very, very new, that just came in. And it was my task to connect with the supervisor to let them know what I had seen after contacting the person. There's a few sighting reports and encounters, humanoids and insectoids. Some of them go unreported. And at the time, we were specifically instructed that they would actually not be sent on the ground, so to speak, to investigate unless there was some type of hint at technology. And I think that was because of the funding source. So there were people that were abducted. There were people that were hurt by their encounter. And that one was left uninvestigated. And that was one that I thought, you know, they really needed help. Someone needed to reach out to them and try to explain to them, maybe even put them in a support group to go through the trauma of what they had experienced. And some of the reports are, you know, once again, you can't define what they are. There was a report that came in when I was in Thailand visiting. I was actually part of a tour group, and a story came across my way of a couple that lived on a farm, and they were tending to the farm, and they had an infant son at the time, and the child disappeared and was replaced by some type of a creature. We have no idea what it was, but it was lying in the crib, and it was terrifying, David. I mean, with the passage of time, I'm just telling it to you as a matter of fact, but it was very, very terrifying. They never did find the child.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is very creepy. We've got about, I think we've got about 5 minutes left. Do you want to talk about your book to where we can get it? Or, I know it's on Amazon, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'll just read out what it's called. Portal: A Lifetime of Paranormal Experiences by Adele Casales Rocha, and I believe it's readily available on Amazon now. Is it? I think it came out March the 1st.
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah, it is on Amazon UK and Amazon US. It is available either Kindle or paperback, whichever you prefer. And I'm happy to say thank you to my publisher, Philip Mantle, of Flying Disc Press.
Yeah, I know Phil.
Yeah. So he encouraged me to publish this very riveting book.
Yeah.
And it's available.
Yeah, I shall certainly be getting my hands on one as soon as I can.
Thank you, David.
No, definitely. No, it's been fantastic talking to you, Adele. Have you got any other? Are you going to any conferences at all, or?
I was actually. I would like to go to a conference, not so much to speak about it, but I'm also very curious about other cases that are out there. And I understand that there is an Outer Limits conference over there in Yorkshire,
there is,
where you are. I'm looking
I'm in
at
Suffolk,
August 17th.
which is further down, but yeah. And I'm actually doing a conference myself, Colonel Charles Holt. I don't know if you've ever met him at all.
Yes,
but
Rendlesham.
Yeah, he's a good friend of mine.
Oh, wonderful.
And I'm arranging a conference for September, if by some chance you can manage to get over.
Well, right now I would like to think that I would be able to. David, I am so riveted to these things and very interested in them. I would love to meet the people, one-to-one and really hear from them what their experience is like. And I think it's very refreshing because these people are very open to new experiences. Sometimes we're not surrounded by people like that, and I always wanted to be surrounded by people like that.
Indeed. I mean, I found out to my disappointment, there's quite a few frauds within this ufology and in the paranormal itself. And I usually find that if there's money involved, you're usually looking at a fraud involved. And I'm not talking about people that write books and sell books. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about people just in it for the money, really. And that's not where we should be. Where we should be, any of us.
No,
I certainly don't do anything for the money. And this conference that I'm doing, it's basically just to pay expenses for the conference. I mean, I'm not even going to fill it to full capacity, really. I'm just going to make it comfortable for the audience, and cover expenses.
Yes.
And Colonel Holt's not charging to come for the talk, but I've got to pay for his fare and everything, so it's
Exactly. That has gotten much press over here in the United States, that Rendlesham incident.
Absolutely, yeah.
The number of people that have witnessed it, and the soldiers that were there on the site. I know numerous books have been written about it, and they wonder what it is. And I know I'm trying to remember who it was that told me that it was actually a time capsule.
Jim Penniston?
It may be.
I think he's got the theory. It could be from the future. Yeah, Jim Penniston's theory. He's got a book coming out soon as well. I'm going to try and get Jim on this show at some point, so keep posted.
Okay.
But,
well, David, it was a pleasure, but I have to tell you that with Rendlesham, the idea that people are coming from the future could be something that is a reality.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't dismiss it out of hand like that. I mean, we don't know what's going on. There's so many things it could be.
Yeah, and the thing that fascinates me is that of all the places in the multiverse, we are few, and this is just my belief. I can't explain it, concretely, but I think we're one of the few that have a concept of time. No one else has time. We experience life in a linear fashion, but there are other beings in the world that experience it spontaneously at different times and different points. So who knows what we're really dealing with?
Well, in real, there is no such thing as time, is there? It's only a measurement that we actually use. Anyway, with that, I'm afraid I'm going to have to wind it up because but it's been fantastic, Adele, and really, I'd like to get you back on again because I think you've got a lot more stories to tell. Maybe in a couple of months I'll give you a shout, and maybe would you like to come back on?
Yeah, I'm sorry, David, if I talk too much.
No, you didn't.
I still have stories, and I do have stories that I'm compiling for the second part of this book. And I haven't told Philip about that, but
Oh, right,
now that
okay.
Philip probably will know that I'm compiling another book.
Yeah.
And I've got about 28 more stories
Oh,
on
great.
that list.
Well, I'll definitely
But
send out an invite for perhaps in a couple of months' time, and hopefully you'll come back on.
okay.
Please do.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity.
That's been fantastic. Anyway, I'm going to have to say goodbye, Adele, because I've run out of time. Anyway,
Bye-bye, David.
Yeah, and I'll be
Bye-bye.
putting everything on the site anyway, and for people to be interested in, and it's fantastic. Thank you, Adele.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Paranormal Dimensions. I'm David Young, and this is the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Please tune in again next week.